to the Historical Museum, and I want to thank you all for coming tonight. We have Rick Trembath this evening, and he is a 33-year veteran of the Forest Service, and he retired off of the Flathead Forest,
Flathead
National
Forest
District.
Mm-hmm.
And he is part of our speaker series in conjunction with our 1910 fire exhibit. So I encourage you to take a few minutes afterwards to give a look at our new exhibit. And we also have a speaker coming up in May, Mark Matthews. And he is giving a talk on the history of smoke jumping the last 50 years.
Oh, neat.
So, welcome.
You said you had a glass of water too.
Yes, I put some water in the podium here.
Oh, great. Okay, that's all I need.
Okay, I'll get you started.
Okay. Well, I want to just a little bit go through my background before I begin the series here, but my first year in wildfire was actually 1965 in northern Minnesota, where I was a Boy Scout. My scoutmaster was a State Forest Service fella. And at that time, he could take a 16-year-old and help him with the hose and the pumps and stuff like that. So I count 1965 as my first year. So that dates me.
Where in Minnesota?
Northern, near Ely, Tower Sedan. But anyway, so I did that for 2 years in northern Minnesota, and then I was a forestry student, so the forest ranger out there had heard about these hotshot crews out west, and as long as you were a forestry student and athletic and were physical, then you could end up applying for and getting a job. So I'm going to start with the presentation, and we'll kind of go through some things through time here. But it's not the yellow shirts, it's the orange shirts to start with here in 1967, and I'm as green as they can be, really, coming from the Midwest out to Montana. I had the wrong boots. Yeah, I had Flatlander boots, and you got to know things and learn things. But this was Kalispell Airport in 1967. There was no security, and the DC-3 comes in and just gets us. But 67, if a lot of you will remember, possibly, it was quite a banner year for fire. Lots of fire in 67. So we worked 63 days without a day off, but we made a lot of money. And
you were wealthy.
Yeah, and it helped put myself through college. But we were based at Big Creek up on the Flathead right across from Glacier Park. And we had the Huckleberry Mountain Fire, which was all that mountain in the back there. So we were able to actually sleep in our own bunks and work fire, which that was the first and only time I think I've ever done that. Was the first year. So this is Big Creek right here, and the cookhouse and everything. But that's the fire kind of going up Huckleberry Mountain, the Apgar Range, and so I got baptism by fire. Would you prefer to have the lights out, or is this okay? Lights out. Okay.
Much prefer the lights.
But I got a good start in fire because I had some really good instructors. One was Earl Cooley from the jump base down here. And I can remember Earl coming up and giving us a lecture on fire behavior. And I was all ears at that age. And he actually ended up with a couple of tears in his eyes, and he really meant what he was saying when he told us we needed to pay attention to what the fire was doing. Anyone can see what a fire did. Most people can observe and know what a fire is doing. But your job, if you want to have a successful career and not get into troubles, is to know what that fire is going to do about 1/2 hour before it does it. And so he took that burden of responsibility and spotting the jumpers on the saddle between Willow Creek and Man Gulch. And that I'll always remember, that training, and I really took that to heart. In 67, we got run out of a few places, and so that was the start of my career.
So did you have the baked potatoes then? Did you have?
No, we did not have fire shelters. We did not have fire pants. We were basically getting out of harm's way. This is the fire actually crossing the Flathead. And to show you some of the safety differences, we were able to cross the Flathead River on a D8 with 2 trips with 25 of us. And that's all over the blade and the winch and the canopy and stuff with a D8.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah. So there I am, right up there, but this is down in Arizona, and that's our crew, kind of a raggle-taggled bunch, but really young and really physical. And that's a lot different than the crews make up today. Today's crews are a lot more experienced, and they're a little older, and there's a lot of differences in the capabilities. I was what they call a runner, because we only had 1 or 2 or 3 radios, and so stuff like that. For the first part of my career, this was our normal campsite, and laying on the ground with the sleeping bag was mostly normal. Then we got these little pup tents, and that was sure luxury after a while, but these are typical fire camps. I'd have to say that, you know, the 3 years in the hotshot crew, I don't have a lot of pictures because I never took many pictures at that time. So we're going to see mostly the pictures later on in my career. But the 70s were fairly wet. And we didn't have a whole huge lot of wildland fires in the 70s, early 80s. But we got a lot of experience burning slash units. And in an active timber sale program at that time, we burned literally thousands of acres. And there were some complex burns, and we really learned a lot about fire behavior and what fire is all about. Because we didn't want to chase it around on the hillsides and all that kind of stuff, so we really lit correctly and all that kind of stuff. So we used to burn all night long and take it down the hill with us, and there's a lot of things you could do and learn about it. Use a lot of techniques. This is a terra torch, and we used helicopter drip torches. They were just in their formulation. And you can get a lot of fire too fast and then get into trouble. So this is kind of, like I said, a really learning experience on fire is that broadcast burning. That's me to the far right, and we're in the Clearwater Junction area with the game range fire. This is really jumping ahead into the 80s already. And about this time I joined a structure fire department too, and so this is kind of my beginning of my urban interface, watching structures burn down that really shouldn't have been burning down. This here is actually on Holter Reservoir, and we're loading up there in a helicopter, and we're landing right there where the smoke jumpers landed in Man Gulch. That's the saddle between Willow Creek and Man Gulch, and the Beartooth fire burned on the Willow Creek side in this case. And we were this was November, a hunter fire with a wind. Really not much for suppression involved with that at all, but the experience was a little humbling being there. Some of our modes of transportation in the 70s and 80s were deuce and a halfs. I'll bet you remember that.
No, we didn't.
You didn't? Okay. But the National Guard would get called out a lot to large fires to support the transportation of folks up the logging roads. And we had the old military planes dropping retardant in the 60s and 70s. It was World War II vintage, B-17s, B-26s, TBMs, and they were really neat airplanes to come at tree level over your head and drop and watch them go through the canyon.
So when did you get yellow shirts?
Mid-70s, I want to say.
Yeah.
Early 70s, mid-70s.
Yeah, early 70s.
Yeah.
He had yellow shirts on Pike.
Yeah, and it was a gradual transition. Some people still have orange, some people have blue, but then I got into kind of overhead positions, crew boss and strike team leader, kind of the old sector boss, division boss in the large fire organization. This is a fire in North Dakota. We got called one time as an incident management team to go to North Dakota, and I could not feature where the heck we could go in North Dakota to find fire. But in the Williston oil field, the Badlands, I'll tell you what, that fire really burns there. Again, some of the camps that we were in, then I got into structure firefighting. And the two complement each other a lot with urban interface. So we're learning a lot. I'm learning an awful lot there about when to go into buildings, how they ignite.
What year was that?
I can't even tell you.
Oh.
But this is just a building burn. We do burns in buildings just to learn, so it just kind of shows that. I want to really kind of jump fairly quick because I don't have a lot of really old pictures, but that's kind of the basis for, the beginning was that hotshot crew and prescribed fire and a few assignments. But 1988 was a pivotal year in fire, in my career anyway. And I was basically out on fire almost the whole summer on that time. The first one was the Brewer fire down in the Custer, where we had very, very little water, just a few Type 6 engines, 100 and some gallons of water on, but there was a long ways to the nearest refill station in that country. So we had an assignment that happens to be the Wyoming hotshot crew that just gotten burned over a couple of assignments ago, and they actually deployed fire shelters. There was a after incident action plan done on that. But I'm working with Mark Rogers and his crew there, and we're prepping around houses. And again, I'm just getting into structure protection a little bit, so it's just basically clearing some vegetation, getting the combustibles from around the structures secured. In this case, this was one of the first BLM foam units. We just found it kind of showing up. And this was supposed to be an easy assignment, but the fire decided to pick up and run pretty hard at us. And so we're actually lighting out around that structure. There's no homeowners or cabin owners there. That's always nice when you're trying to figure out the bag of tricks that you have. And so we're going to actually light out around these structures just to reduce the intensity. What we want to do is try and limit the amount of combustion at that structure when that front comes in there. So we went in first and lit, and we're working our way back out. We're lighting all around there, and we're getting the heck out of there because this isn't a real safe place to be on foot. We could go into the structure, but it's better. We got a good safety zone on out, so we just kind of ran out after lighting this. And it was fairly intense for a while. And
the house burned down?
No, it stood there. But we didn't use any water on it. We wanted to save our water for in case it got ignited to go back and overhaul it. So tactics and strategy, urban interface, real tricky sometimes. It depends on what the fire's doing, what your resources are. We didn't have the opportunity to get a retardant drop, to lessen the fire intensity. But you can see that the needles are left on a lot of trees around the structure, and I attribute that to that underburning we did the few minutes that we had prior to that fire coming in there. It took away the heat from the floor up a ways, so that I think that there was just less intensity. That's just an educated guess on my part. Had other buildings bumped. You can see we cleared a little bit around it, and anyway. So we started getting into these fires in '88. Fantail fire, this was actually North Dakota, Williston oil field, and we ended up with a lot of intense fire around these oil installations. And I thought the two weren't going to mix really good, but we had no problems whatsoever with the well-constructed tank batteries, they called them, and all that stuff. The only thing we had to watch out for was hydrogen sulfide from the wells that weren't capped correctly. So as long as there was a wind, we were okay. If there was a calm day with a high humidity, that was a watch-out day for us for hydrogen sulfide collecting in some of the draws and valleys. Had some coal seams start on fire, which we weren't going to mop up at all. And but anyway, this is how juniper can burn. And that really impressed me. That was drought juniper, but that is very intense heat with very little vegetation. So when people plant juniper, arborvitae, whatever you want to call it, around your houses, and you don't water it, you get it dry, you'll end up with some burning like this adjacent to your house. So I would advocate not having a lot of juniper around your house. Basically some stuff. I ended up being a safety officer for a lot of 1988. I had fairly good operational experience as a division soup sector boss, and so I got interested in safety for a couple of reasons. One, I was medical already with the ski patrol up at Big Mountain and with Big Fork quick response unit we had just formed, and I really saw people get hurt on fires that I felt like maybe if I had talked to them or something that I could make a difference. So I really got into safety in a big way. So in 1988, I ended up getting tasked off on my Type 1 safety officer credentials. So I've been a Type 1 safety officer since 1989. And this North Fork fire in Yellowstone, we were on for 21 days. I was first assigned as medical support / safety on the plateau, where we had a whole bunch of hotshot crews and we could do absolutely nothing with that fire. None of our tactics and strategies would work in that dry timber and that lodgepole fuel types. So we were really wasting our time.
So what kind of tactics did you try?
Well, we tried connecting open meadows and burning out strips in that open meadow, you know, and trying to create fuel things. But when the fire wanted to get up and move with heavy canopy, it just spots over those things, and there's just nothing you can do with that. Whereas down there by the communities, we had a very large show of structure protection with the facilities in Yellowstone and surrounding adjacent things. Had the opportunity to be in Old Faithful during the September 7th run in there. It's the most spectacular large crown fire event that I've ever experienced. It was caused by a dry cold front, winds that were supposedly in the 40, 50, 60 mile an hour range, and it picked up a large front and just drove it really strong into Old Faithful. And where that arrow is the few pictures that I took looking out at the tree wall. But that's kind of what it looks like right there coming in at you. And so all of a sudden the amount of space around a house doesn't look so big. And this is spruce, lodgepole, and alpine fir. And that kind of a forest, it doesn't burn real frequently, but when it burns with the wind and drought, it'll really go. And so that's my benchmark for how much of a space you need for a safety zone. And believe me, it's considerable when those fires get up with the wind and run. 1910, that was a 2-day wind event that pushed the fire, you know, basically through what I would call a little lighter fuel types than are out there right now. I think you got more fuel loading on those hills than you probably had in 1910, because there hasn't been any recent fire history. But anyway, so we had about 30 to 40 buildings catch on fire within a matter of a couple minutes. And we were able to actually put out an awful lot of those. But there was a sense of shell shock. I brought 2 crews into a corrugated metal shop building that was in the government area there. And the windows were hot to the touch, and that radiant heat was, boy, almost a football field away. And once it died down, though, it dies down pretty fast. All that fine vegetation burns out, and it was open enough up there, so all we had to do was run to the hydrants and hook up hose and start on the outside fire suppression effort for all the starts of the buildings. You know, when the things are really going strong like that, I just never took the time to stop and take pictures. And so I missed,
Well, you were a little busy.
missed a lot of opportunities. Some more fires. This is Tanner Gulch in 1989, and this is really what you don't want to see coming up at you. You know, if you're in this little cleared out area, is that a safety zone? Is it a shelter deployment zone, or is it even survivable? And it all depends on the fire behavior. And this happened to go up and away, but we had a way out anyway. But again, you don't ever want to be on top of a running crown fire coming up a hill. And I learned that in the 60s when we're in the mid-slope area where that thermal belt. We've been taught about that, but once you learn it, from the fact that you got to run the heck out of there because the fire starts during the middle of the night and starts running up at you, then you really learn about it. So, tactics. This shovel full of dirt's really not gonna do it here. So, anyway, there's not much you can do with fire when it really wants to burn. Just plain and simple, you've just got to stay out of the way and wait till weather changes or something changes to make it more tenable. This is Walt Tomasak from the former jumper. He's right now an ops chief on our Type 1 incident management team. He's got I think he's got about 50 years of experience, and I've got 45, and so we're bringing some experience to our Type 1 team, but we're getting old. We need replacements.
My son's coming.
Okay, that's great. There was a mishap with somebody leaving a bus in the wrong place. And, the crews oftentimes will get dropped off at a drop point and they'll go to work, and then fire will misbehave or pick up or whatever, and then all of a sudden somebody remembers the bus driver's back there, so so they went and got the bus driver, ran into some clear cuts, but the bus got singed, so it made for a good picture. Going to jump to 94 in Washington, the Tyee fire. It's one of the most exhausting fires I was ever on, because I watched the fire go from about 250 acres. I was diverted en route from Colorado. First outside resource as a safety officer on this fire. Kind of hitchhiked up to the fire because there was no transportation, but it's kind of the way we did things. But I watched that fire go from a couple hundred acres to about 110, 120,000 acres in about a week. And we had the news media there. It was some very extraordinary fire behavior. We had structure involvement every night. We lost a lot of structures. This is not going to do it here, this little engine with a couple of guys on the back. And that's one of the things that as a safety officer we really have to weigh, when to disengage. And a lot of firefighters are pretty aggressive, but they need to be intelligent, and that's what we got to kind of combine. So this is a lot of firefighters trying to figure out what to do and what to go on. Get a retardant drop, and just kind of makes for neat pictures.
Gorgeous.
These people on the roofs, during my course of career, I had 2 broken legs with people falling off of roofs trying to use water up on roofs, which that composition roof is fireproof, unless there's a lot of moss or needle buildup in the gutters. Don't worry about that. But people tend to want to get up high and use a lot of water, and so we've had 2 falls off of roofs. Once an outbuilding gets going like that, this engine needs to get the heck out of there, because you don't know. Those outbuildings are the worst thing there is in the world, because what do you put in them? All kinds of stuff. Yeah, that's going to pop and blow. So, use some of this for training stuff, but anyway. The fire would bounce off the canyons and go up one slope, come down the other one, and there was just a confluence of the Cascades, a whole bunch of very sharp incised draws and gulches and all that stuff going to the Columbia River, which went perpendicular to the drainages, so it made for just a lot of turbulence terrain-wise, combined with dry vegetation and fire behavior. This is a sheriff that he and I are together, and we just saw this house about to go, and we were able to save that house. When you evacuate all the residents out of the area, you've got a lot of vulnerability if you don't have enough firefighters to go around. I'll show some things. That's what gets the structures, is the lack of maintenance around the foundations or ignitable points on the structures. You can see this building's on fire back here. That really poses a jeopardy to this house. So sometimes there's a significant amount of domino effects, especially in California on the ridges. We lose house after house after house after house. And it's not from the fire, it's from the forest fire or brush fire, it's from the first house being ignited. And so sometimes it's that way. And there's a bunch of old buildings that will naturally catch fire. I didn't realize this, by the way, that the state of Washington was in a lawsuit about burning out around structures, and so they had given an edict not to burn out around structures. And this, I'm watching another operation do that, but that's some of the most trouble I've been into, was a news photographer taking my picture and putting it in the paper, and in fact it went all over the country, burning out around a structure in near Chelan, Washington, and we were all supposedly told not to do that. But I was from Montana, I didn't know that, and I really didn't know that. And it worked effectively. We didn't lose the house or anything. But that perception of that guy lighting there, if that house doesn't survive, it's the same thing in the Bitterroot that happened with that major lawsuit down there, $10 million settlement. You know, if you're a firefighter, you got to make some of those decisions. And, you know, sometimes it's not appropriate to use fire. If you've got a retardant drop, the two counteract each other. They're not compatible. But it just depends on what you have. So this is kind of interesting. During a firefight, you'll see people doing all kinds of weird stuff, including homeowners. And this is a water tender driver. He doesn't know what to do with his load, so he's just going to pre-wet this house without a nozzle. And he's got a lot of water, so it's just a tactic I've never seen used too much.
Is that good or bad?
Well, he's putting a lot of water on there, but most of it's going to just go down the driveway. So if you can put gel on a house, it will really protect the heat. A lot of folks do not recognize the importance of infrastructure. And bridges, wooden bridges, cell towers, communication links, there's all kinds of stuff that besides houses we need to worry about and protect. So
Probably
anyway.
need to protect those more than the houses.
Sometimes that's the only access to the houses. Yes, it can be a higher priority in certain places. But when the fire just goes through a person that likes to accumulate things, that is a tough scene to try and figure out, you know, how to protect. We got that old barn there, but the trouble is they logged right up to it and they have a huge slash pile on the far side of it. So we asked the homeowners, they were in back of us, they said, oh, well, we were thinking of getting rid of that cabin anyway. So it makes for a good picture, but it's really not a structure loss. So sometimes you'll see structure loss reports in the newspaper, and what they are is outhouses and old barns like this. They're not really houses. So anyway.
The neat barn.
My job on this fire was to work with the structure fire departments that were coming out of Spokane, Kingsway, and Tacoma. And they were sending a lot of resources to this Tyee fire because it was burning down so many houses. And those firefighters are some of the best firefighters there are in the world, but they were totally out of their element with this large fire coming down. And when I was using fire against fire, there was no need for them to ever use their water, and they were really frustrated because they wanted to shoot water on it. Well, if you can get it to burn out, then it's safe, then it's good. But if you mix water with burning out and you get a whole bunch of smoldering, you're going to be babysitting that for a long time. So that's where we, you know, basically slept at night, just along the road. That's very an unsafe place to sleep. I use this in unsafe practices because all somebody's got to do is pull in and around there and they get run over. But we got bumped with fire on structures time and time again. That's just some of the equipment that was pulled in. That's one of 3 staging areas in the Schland fire.
And what year was that?
94. Saw an event here that really spooked me a little bit. You can see how intense this fire is there. There's almost no fuel. It's almost like a field in there. And for whatever reason, we ended up with a fire whirl that came out of vegetation, came across a grass field, and it actually baked the pavement near a field. And that was crumbling then in the next days after that fire whirl sat on that road and worked around. And in looking at it, it looked more like a place where you'd spin the engine. Just, you know, some more. We go down. We're already up to 2,000, so we're going fairly fast here. But in Scott Abel Fire in New Mexico, is near Cloudcroft, New Mexico. I've had the chance to get to 18 different states on fire so far, and they're all a little bit different, all a little bit unique, but much the same in a lot of ways. So again, safety is tied in with medical and contingencies, and so here we're evacuating out a firefighter that had a fall, and I think he's got maybe a broken leg. I'm not absolutely remembering. But that fire took up and went, and I'll tell you what, all of those cabins in that heavy forest were not situated very well. So they lost, I think it was 22 out of 25 cabins in the subdivision. And there's just no way anybody would ever in their right mind want to stay with those structures when it burned this intensely. And so that's the aftermath. There isn't anything living in that environment. And that's all Doug fir forest right there. And I like this one because there's the fire truck protecting this structure right there. And I like to show that because that's what can happen with a real fire truck if you're not in the right place. You know, the urban interface guidelines are for, what, 100 feet, a couple hundred feet around? And I tell firefighters that if they're in an urban interface structure protection mode, those are probably the most dangerous ones you can get.
That's flat.
If they've done the minimal clearing, you're putting yourself between what siding can ignite with radiant heat, you know, and the fuel things. And not only that, but you get fire whirls and you get eddying and you get all kinds of nasty stuff happen. So if you want a firefighter to set up in your yard, I'll show you later on the size areas that you really need. Another bus with problems. 2000 was a good year around here too, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, we saw some fire behavior that was pretty spectacular. There was a lot of days we could not figure out any meaningful work on what we could do with those fires. And that is very frustrating for us as firefighters. It's very frustrating for the public because really there's nothing you can do with that fire in those fuel conditions that go like that. You don't have anchor points. You don't have any way to get in there safely and work that fire.
You know what's interesting though, you listen to the old timers, and
Yeah.
I'm talking about, you know, guys that are now probably in their 80s and 90s, that
Yeah.
were, and some of the early fire, and they just don't understand this standing back and letting it run. Because they'll tell you, you know, well, everybody's a sissy these days because they stood in there and fought them, you know, and it's just, of course they lost heat.
Yeah. Well, you know, and they'll die down at night, but if there's predictions the same for the next morning, all you're going to do is get in there and get a start, and you're going to get run out again. You know, there's other times where you can engage the fire once it goes down. You can start anchoring, flanking, and holding and working it, but there's other times where it just will depend totally on the situation. So we like to try and get it if we can. This is a rollover on the 9 Mile fire. Again, you know, we have a problem. That's basically called an incident within an incident. You got stuff to take care of.
Did somebody get hurt?
Actually, in the dozer rollover, no. But we had this rollover on the highway of a public information officer assigned to the fire, and this was on the Music Broad fire. Boy, what's the town near it? Down there.
Sula.
Zula?
East of that, Darby. No, not east of Darby. But anyway, in the middle of kind of nowhere. In the middle of nowhere, but she was ejected because she wasn't wearing a seatbelt. We harp on seatbelts, and so she ended up with really severe vital signs. But this is the kind of response that we had. We launched the military evacuation ship from the Valley Complex, jumped over the mountains there to us and picked her up and went to St. Pat's Hospital. We try and grease the skids for these kind of events. The only thing we didn't figure was whether or not St. Pat's Hospital could take the weight of a Black Hawk. So.
And could they?
No, we didn't try it because nobody knew.
Because that was the old building, right?
Well, that was, no, that's a new one.
That was the new one?
Yeah, yeah.
So what, you just...
We landed at a convenient place where Missoula ambulance picked her up, but she had a ruptured spleen and she really needed to get into surgery in a hurry. Again, we lost the bridge there. 2001, we went up to the Moose Fire. That's my bunkhouse again, right there. Remember I showed you the fire going up the one side? This one's going up the other side in 2001. So that's the same ridge right there. But anyway, so again, pretty good fuel types up the North Fork of the Flathead. When that likes to burn, it really likes to burn.
How big was that one?
Boy, Moose Fire was, I think, I want to say 10, 15,000 acres. It wasn't really, really huge. You know, a huge fire in the 60s and 70s, the fire that we had in northern Idaho, oh no, I can't remember. Sundance Fire. That was huge at that time. That was 56,000 acres or something. And right now, we get 100,000 acre fires all the time, it seems like. 2002 Missionary Ridge in Durango, Colorado. We're gonna watch some fire in this area here. Got houses all over in there. And we're trying to work with the fire and pick up spots. It's crowning out, it's torching out, it's doing different things. Want to get up and run. There's a point of diminishing returns where you're just not able to pick it up anymore. And so we're regrouping because we don't want anybody back there. So what we're doing is we're sending in engines first or pickup trucks to find out where we've got ignitions. We want to send an engine in as quick as we can because we've got sometimes a half an hour to an hour to pick up starts on buildings before they'll burn down and get into the inside. It takes fire a long time to go through this wall from the inside. It takes a fire a long time to sometimes get into a house, depending on a bunch of different things. But we got some structures that are well involved and others that aren't. By the way, at this, part of my safety responsibilities is to work with helicopters and helibases and all that stuff. So we've got enough hardware in here where we can justify having crash rescue. It's actually an airport operation at this point. And this was the quick response engine that ended up with this hydraulic fuel leak fire on this large sky crane. You can see where that rotor shouldn't be that way at all.
Didn't do it any good.
But anyway, they probably saved about $2 million worth of property damage on that machine. They probably lost about $1 million. This is about a $3 million machine. So anyway, and you can see the fire burning in the background.
And what caused the?
It was a hydraulic leak. When they started up the engine, they had done some maintenance on it, and they didn't have one connection right or something. So it spewed hydraulic fuel into the jet engine, and then they had problems. We had the big fire. This is a new start, and so we've got a lot of resources around. But you can see we've got houses on mid-slope, and that was not a good deal again. So if we've got a fire like this coming at us, even though it's coming downhill, you have a chance of it getting way down and coming back up at you. And we debated, but nobody really wanted to go up there on that mid-slope house. And so you see that white thing there? That says for sale.
Cheap. Hope they had homeowners insurance.
Yeah, and it's too steep a slope, too much fuel around it. And so it's burning right there. It's really frustrating to have to do that, but there's just no way that I would safely be able to say that any firefighters could have stayed at that house. And that's some tough decision making. They did drop retardant and water around it with trying to give it a chance, but it didn't work.
What was the composition of the roof on that one?
You know, I don't even know because I didn't go up there. I just saw the location and I said, you better not. Yeah. It's the only picture I've got with a helicopter, bucket, and an aerial. And this is an ineffective water wasting tool usually for the most part. These deck guns that you see on TV and stuff like that are not good tactics, generally speaking. They're more of a California kind of a thing, but you won't see that very much on most fires. This house got a lot of radiant heat and it never ignited totally. There was a crew up here though that kind of overhauled it, so there had been some ignition on this house and they put it out. That house just down below it didn't fare as well. Anytime you can burn 2x4s directly like that in railing, you got way too much heat. So even though they had cleared out below the hill, there was a lot of radiant heat, a lot of fire volume that came up that hill. And that's the molten aluminum going down the hill then.
Wow.
Now these
So that actually melted the
yeah.
But And what's the melting point of aluminum? It's really high.
No, it's not too bad, but it's hot. Yeah, these are these out sheds that I told you about, and see the pop in the roof? So something went kablam in that little shed, maybe a propane tank or a little gas thing. And I like this picture because this homeowner saved these pine cones with his sprinkler, but he lost his house. So something just wasn't thought of as far as what the vulnerability and the ignition potential of the house was.
And it's amazing that the propane tank didn't blow.
No, well, yeah. You know, most propane tanks are pretty safe in a fire. They really are. But you can always have the exception. And we have spot fires all over the neighborhood, and we lost a lot of buildings, so anyway. I don't know, you know, I probably could do this for a few days, but I'm gonna switch things here a minute. I put these in a couple different segments just because by the amount of pictures gets to be too much for one thing. So let's go to a few different areas of the country just really quickly here. This was down in Florida, and this is the Bicey fire. And they got neat fire trucks down there. They really do. You think our four-wheelers are geared up, but this is how they go through the swamps. Yeah, swamp buggies. Yeah. But when the swamps dry out, they can really burn well. They concentrate all the alligators, though, wherever there's water. And these guys feast on all the accumulated fish and stuff that's in there. And this guy came on the back of a four-wheeler, and these rattlesnakes, they were pretty plentiful down there. They had all kinds of stuff that would bite you and poke you down there, so it wasn't really good. But when the fires along the main freeway and interstate, it creates a major smoke problem because that's high-speed traffic. And so we were asked as an incident management team, see what we can do to limit the smoke along the freeway.
Really?
Yeah.
What, did you get big blowers?
No, you basically have to work with window opportunities in the weather. And so sometimes if the wind's blowing some way, you'll want to straighten everything out and burn it all out. They don't mind it burning. This is in the big cypress swamp, and that's used to fire. So they want it burned out quickly. And so the only way to do that is to put some hotshot crews and sphere dispensers, helicopter ignition, and get it all done really quick. And then you're not sitting day after day after day with a lot of smoke. It burns out rather quickly.
Where was this in Florida?
It was between Miami and Tampa. The Alligator Highway, they call it, or something like that. But you know, you think of Florida as being wet and humid and all that stuff, but I want to tell you what, that palmetto and stuff really burns well. It doesn't take much to ignite it, and it's a flashy fuel. So it's a lot of the same tactics and principles and ignition patterns that we're used to up here. Let's go over to the Ahorn fire here for a little bit. This, we're going to watch a little bit of fire behavior. I hope this will work. And then for structure protection, we had these summer residences and stuff in Benchmark. And the history of the east slope up there off the Continental Divide is such that there's some major wind events that happen up there that we're pretty fearful with if we have fire up there in July or August. And you get a lot of these cabins in the heavier fuel types. Again, there's not anything we can do to be there and stuff. By the way, this is my normal office right here. And I basically will live out of a truck on fire. And to me, that's the best thing I can do. I've got everything with me there. I've got my transportation. And I've just learned how to sleep pretty comfortably on the back seat or whatever. So we're going around these structures and assessing them. We have winners and losers. We, have a game plan in our mind, what we're going to do. In looking around them, though, I saw this grizzly bear. And so that was kind of cool. She had a little cub with her too, by the way. This is not a solution for urban interface. This is wrapping a building. Either the fuel should be taken out around it or whatever, because you're not always in a position to do that. It's very costly. We have a lot of agencies, Forest Service, Park Service, that like to wrap backcountry cabins and all that stuff. But really, they need to think about fuel reduction and ignition point reduction rather than doing this. So it looks all good, but you know what? In looking at some of this, the fire can go right underneath this stuff and burn it down. And oftentimes we don't see quite the correct prep work done. Or if they don't use enough staples in a wind event, all that aluminum comes off anyway. There's also some home remedies here. This is a entrepreneur contractor that will basically frost check your buildings. They spray a retardant around the outsides of it, and it will reflect a lot of heat. And so there's lots of different ways of doing things, but I am a firm believer in reducing fuel loading rather than having to have this guy in the right place at the right time to handle that. Again, one of our infrastructures was this big, expensive pack bridge. So we sprinklered it with a couple of pumps down there. This Prineville hotshot crew shows up on a lot of fires that I'm on, and all of these stars around the top represent the victims down in Colorado that from their crew. Again, we're burning out around a facility in there. This is some of that infrastructure stuff. If we have a fire coming this way and going through that, we're going to fry this communications tower with the light aluminum and the cable. And so just by reducing the fuel like that, that's all you really need to do. But this fire in Ahorn was really kind of a neat little thing. I have a little video clip of it. I want you to take a look at the rotation of the smoke. Anytime you've got rotation and a vortice, you've got fire behavior. And basically the whole thing there is rotating. Now watch how fast it takes for this fire and this fire to come together. And if you got a house mid-slope sometimes, can you see how fast that's
They
going?
just draw together.
Yeah, they're just wanting to come together.
That's less than a minute.
And look at them swirling.
Yeah, so
Tornado.
you really don't want to be on foot there with hand tools. Now that fire came to this ridge and it absolutely stopped.
Wow.
Didn't come over the top because we were having a wind shear with eddying, and it was enough to transfer that wind energy into combining with the fire and the in-sucking updrafting to go all up. Yeah.
Where is the?
It's out of Benchmark and near Choteau, Augusta area, near Augusta. It's part of the Marshall. But see how the whole thing's circulating?
Yeah, the whole thing. It's
Yeah.
rotating. It's amazing. So how big does a fire have to get before it gets its own weather?
You know, it'll make local influences of weather all the time, but and it can influence weather. But I don't know. It depends on how dry the atmosphere is and a lot of variables, but it'll influence the weather considerably. Yeah. And see, here's one of these little concentrated whirls, but the fact the whole thing is circulating, it's just a time to pull away when you see that kind of thing happening. Yeah, there's a real intense little whirl there. But again, it just really just stopped right there and just laid down. But there's a lot of volume of heat going up.
That's the same thing? That's the same?
Yeah, those are just still pictures of the same thing. So it's nice to be on the opposite mountain and take a telephoto and take these pictures. Oops, I want to cancel out of that. Let me do that. I haven't figured out how to work video in this. I'm sorry for this. That's to me, this is a really interesting picture because there's some really, gosh, there we go. Okay, when we're on one fire, we're subject to getting called on another fire. So this, we got instantly called down to Meriwether, down by Helena, when they had a start that was a lot more threatening to structures than the Ahern fire. So right now we're sharing resources. Anytime you got a large fire in an area, they're subject to initial attack and to work in other fires around the area. And so this really was no real problem. It ended up coming into an area that had been underburned. And the Helena forest had done a nice big underburn, and when I got to that, you know, it just laid down. And so I think the last month you had Tony Harwood from the Confederated Salish Kootenai tribe come in and talk about fire use, Aboriginal fire use. And I'm very much of an advocate of trying to get fuels reduced so that they'll just have underburns and stuff like that. By the way, we see these same helicopters on all the major fires. I mean, there's just not that many in the country. They go all over the place. This is a Chippy fire in 2007.
Where was that?
This was out of Plains.
Okay. Never checked this on
Fire at night can be really kind of neat. This is the Gap fire in 2008 in Santa Barbara. And this was the last major one that I was on as safety officer, but it's a little humbling coming into an M briefing where they say, well, we got about a 4,000 acre fire, but there's $2 billion worth of homes potentially in harm's way. And that's the nature of California. And they've got some of the best firefighters in the world down there. They've also got some of the worst fuel types and fire behavior. So I'm looking at some of these subdivisions and I'm saying, what the heck are we going to end up doing? And there's nothing you can do with that. There really is nothing you can do with that. If the fire is backing in, you know, and burning under moist conditions or something, you can sometimes do things, but you got to be really careful.
The question you have to ask is, why are they allowed to carry fire insurance?
Yeah, why are they allowed to build there?
Yeah, you know, if I was an insurance adjuster, I'd question some of
I
that.
know, absolutely we're not.
So it's risk versus benefit. We're not going to risk a lot of folks, firefighters, you know, and we're going to evacuate those kind of areas like that. That's just a canyon ripe for a major catastrophe. But we'll do what we can do to suppress the fires because that's our job. And retardant is a big deal. And then we had to weigh, you know, what are we going to do? Are we going to wait for the fire to come to these things, or are we going to go after it? Well, this is pretty tough ground to go after fire in. And the news media is really interested. You've got a political pressure cooker, basically, going on with helping you make these decisions. And so, you know, your TV's on there, you got cameras that, you know, in your meetings, and, you know, I really like Montana an awful lot compared to California. But anyway, just some of the stuff. Also had this major transmission line that arced a couple times. The power company really doesn't like that to happen. And when they have a lot of smoke on these things, these are two guys up here, one here and one down here, and they have to clean the insulators, all the bells, you know, on the tower, by hand with cleaning solvent or something. I'm not sure what they do. But they actually got left off on a helicopter on the tower. It was really they were no part of the fire thing. To me, that looked pretty risky. But even in California with all the motels, this is where I slept. And the reason we do that is because the incident management team needs to stay together all the time, and we need to know where everybody is, and we need to be close to where things are happening. So that we just use part of school complex, school grounds, and that's my accommodations. That's me shaking the gut. Now when Arnold was coming across the room, I remembered the last movie that I saw him come and take somebody and then throw that person. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so I said, Arnold, how come I have to come down here and put out your fires? No, I didn't say that, actually.
But you were thinking it, weren't you?
Yeah. But, you know, it's just so much politics involved with it. And Arnold came with a whole entourage of news media and limousines and all that stuff. Versus our governor, he shows up with a rancher friend in the back of our morning briefing unannounced. And so somebody says, isn't that our governor back there? Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was interested, so asked him to come up, and he says, I want you guys to put out this fire. Well, this is, I think, the Derby fire or something. I can't remember, but anyway. Yeah, a lot happening down there in California. They've got some really fancy equipment, but they've also got this. That's basically manzanita brush and
Just try to cross.
greasewood or whatever.
Amazing.
Now, when we commit shot crews to working that fire in this kind of terrain, we need to really support them with helicopters and water drops, and we know they're going to get poison oak, and we talk about that. We know if you guys are going to be in this kind of stuff sawing and in there for 2 to 3 days, you guys are going to come out of it with a whole bunch of poison oak. So we want you to send out anybody that's a little bit more susceptible right away, and if you can, I mean, we're just going to deal with it when it comes out. So,
Are they picking it up from oils in the smoke or from actually walking through it?
a little bit of both. If you get too much smoke inhalation, you can get respiratory problems, but most of it's sawing and having those chips with the oil coming in, and you can't get rid of that because it's on your gloves, it's on your clothes, and any exposed skin will get it. So anyway,
That mansion. I don't
Yeah.
know.
but sophisticated stuff. We're doing a little burnout here along the ridge. Everything's favorable. When things are favorable, you just go for it and get it done. And so it makes for some good photos, but really it's a lot less dangerous than going down after the fire, just this burning out. But it's a good news media event. And, it's... And then we're secure. If this is successful, we've got a lot of that perimeter buttoned up. I have a lot of respect for the firefighter on the ground. As a Type 1 safety officer, I feel like I'm bringing the concerns to that individual ground pounder, the beginning firefighter, into the decision making for what we're doing. Because if I wouldn't do it myself, I don't want to see us put folks into doing things that we wouldn't do ourselves. And I spend enough time doing that myself, so I have a feeling for the folks that we're putting to work. If we're breathing too much smoke for too long, if we're really trying to put line in where it can't be put in, those are where I start speaking up. He's shooting a flare gun. A lot of these shot crews right now have got all kinds of pyrotechnics. You think they put out a fire, but a lot of them start a lot more fire than they put out. But using fire against fire has always been a very effective means of doing business. And these are a canister that you can throw. So they're just doing different things. By the way, the news media in California have got free reign. They can show up wherever they want to, and by state law. And that's a little different than our area where we try and escort and stuff like that. So we still try and work together, though. It's just the way to do business.
Do they need to take the annual fire safety refresher?
They don't.
Wow.
No.
Whoa. So,
As long as they're accompanied by somebody and as long as they don't get in our way. Something like that, anyway. This is a DC-9 dropping retardant, and I've never seen this in Montana. It's a huge drop, 5,000 gallons or something like that, more. But you know what? That's not real effective. The more concentrated drops where you really need them along the line, unless it's light fuel types, which this brush is actually too thick for that. Anyway, I'm going to just say that from my experience and watching some of the effectiveness of the drops. Probably really good in grass and fine fuels, but for heavier fuels, it's just going too fast, can't get down low enough, and the drift is significant. So I don't know. I think it's very costly for what we maybe get out of that.
You go back one more. Is that a bulldoze, a fire break that's almost from that distance, looks like the length of a football field?
Or is it a road?
No, this is a fuel break. Yeah, this was
bulldozed.
Yes.
Through the.
Yeah. There's a lot of ridge fire lines that are basically cleared ridge top or ridge lines. Yeah.
So the cause of fires are mostly man-made in California, or they lightning?
No, they're a little bit of both, but in California, the closer you get to the coast, the less lightning. And the higher you get into the Sierras, the more lightning. And the more you get inland, to our area, the more lightning you can get too. So it's a combination, but a lot of human-caused fires in California.
I think I read somewhere 80%, but I don't know if that's true.
And again, a lot of the engine crews will just bring cots. It's usually a nice night kind of atmosphere. We'll take over a school sometimes and set up camp. I think we had about 1,200 folks in our fire camp on the Gap fire here. And they all need to, basically get orchestrated. Who's going to go where and what are they going to do and all that kind of stuff. You mix in old veterans with new firefighters, and so sorting out the capabilities, and it's a big job to manage that. I like the hotshot crews. They're self-sufficient. They know what they're doing. There's a lot of expertise. You don't have to usually do anything but set direction for them. That is a mess.
We do not want to be the one to sort it out.
Yeah, go through a lot of supplies at a fire camp. But that is very inhospitable ground to be building handline in.
And that was all fire, that white?
Yeah. And these are lookouts, and they've got binoculars, and if they can get a vantage point, they want to pick up as soon as possible any ignition, any puff up of smoke, because this fire will actually smolder like it does long term underneath the vegetation, and when the conditions are right, then it'll pop up again. So they're calling in drops. They can oftentimes see the targets better than the aircraft can. And so a lot of snorkel filling up. This is a 12-inch, by the way, pipe. 12-inch pipe runs off the Venturi, off the jet engines, and it'll take on about 2,000 gallons of water in about 30 seconds. And they're up and going again. So like for Flathead Lake or an East Shore Flathead Lake fire, these would be ideal. They can do their turnarounds in about 3-4 minutes. And very effective, very skilled pilots. They can get right where you want, drop the height that you want. They're just very, very skilled.
What's the cost per hour, though?
Very high, and I don't know what, it keeps jumping every year.
How much do those little creatures cost?
You know, these are about $3 million machines, but that's probably twice as effective as that DC-9, or, in my opinion anyway, it is. That can put it right where you want it. And again, the same numbers. I saw this on the North Fork. I saw it in Florida. We get to know the pilots after a while and everything. This can drop in 1 salvo or 2, I think. I don't think it can go 4, so 1 or 2 salvos. This is kind of interesting to me. This is fairly light brush fuel, yet you had scorch way out here. So you had enough radiant heat come up here to worry about there. Vinyl fences do not take fire well. Again, this would be a combination of some dozer work and then hand line at the end. And we're going to go down into this hole and down this hand fire line. And what these are is contingency lines. And we're going to work with some of the crews that are down there. But they're working direct support, picking up targets, going along the edge, cold trailing, and building line where needed. But a lot of this will just go out, but you got to find the hot spots and isolate them, or you'll have the wind come up and the humidity drop, and this will be off to the races again. So that requires crews to go by hand around that whole perimeter of that 5,000 to 6,000 acres and dig everything out. And we committed 8 shot crews for 3 days, and we had the fire secured, along with a lot of constant water bucket work. But the alternative to wait for the fire to come into the subdivisions, that would not have been good. So anyway, that's kind of what we did there. I have a lot of respect for the pilots. That's the hand line going up the hill. Had hose lays in different places. And this is the line to see the doctor after they're coming off the hill. And we have poison oak all over these folks. They knew they were going to be this way when they came out. We'll give them rest for as long as it takes for them to get back into shape.
That's done.
No, that's
poison
oak.
oak.
Poison oak, too.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so it's risk versus benefit. We're really risking firefighters for the benefit of all those the homeowners that are in the wrong place.
Yeah, I don't know how they did fire insurance.
Yeah. So that's going forward on that hand line with saw work. They really earn their money on this. And to me, this is the picture I'd like to, really leave you with. This to me is the firefighter, and he spent 3 days down there. And as a Type 1 safety officer, I've got assistants usually and trainees. So I really liked to walk down there in the middle of these hotshot crews, and he said, "What are you doing down here? You're a Type 1 safety officer, aren't you back in camp?" I said, "No." I says, "I like to be where you guys are." So anyway, I still can hike. I can still hike. I've got, I could go on for another hour if you want. I got one more PowerPoint, but I'm going to leave it up to you guys.
Could you talk about the fires of 1910 and what was the cause of them and just a little kind of history of the 1910?
And I wasn't there. I want everyone to understand I wasn't there. So this is going to be my guess. There was a lot of combination of fire on the landscape in 1910, from the railroad activity, engines and burning wood and coal, and there was a lot of homesteader clearing being done long term. I mean, the best way to get rid of stumps and logs was to burn them, and there was even the possibility of some incinerary, if people didn't like whatever. But anyway, I think what you had was basically a combination of a bunch of lit fires all over Idaho and Montana. But what you didn't have was the major wind of August 20th, 21st. Is that the right days? 1910? You had a major wind event for 2 days that really pushed all of those lit fires a long ways. We were really worried about that in 2000. If we would have had that same 2-day wind event, dry cold front, you get those passages in late summer, early fall. If you had a major wind event for 2 days in 2000, you would have seen the 9 Mile fire, the Music Broad, the Valley Complex. All of these fires would have gotten up and gone. No doubt in my mind. And we didn't do that, though. We went into a gradual fall and had moisture come, and we were done with it. But, that's kind of, if the alignment gets to be just right, you're going to have problems with that. So.
The Black Mountain fire in Missoula was, in 2003, was pretty bad.
Yeah.
Were you involved in that one?
No, I wasn't.
Yeah, we had to evacuate.
Yeah. So, those were 2 of my 3 PowerPoints, and I'm thinking I should probably stop there rather than to go one more.
The fire crews back then were complicated by the infiltration of what we call wobblies, They were social anarchists, activists, and sometimes when they were just 2 or 3 of them in a crew, they would cause more trouble, and sometimes they would even counteract some of the firefighting activities by igniting fires.
Yeah.
Because they were kind of anti-government. They were trying to protest. They were doing it in Butte mines, but they were also finding themselves on North Idaho fires and causing dismay among the whole efforts to put the fires out.
Yeah, there, you know, in the books that are written about the 1910 fire, there is an incendiary and an arson side of that.
So how concerned is the Forest Service about the bark beetle? And what's going on with our forests right now that are just
Well,
flat?
you know, actually, I'm a forester by profession, almost more than a firefighter. And to me, it's just too much crowding too long, and a lot of the stands have not had fire for a long time. They're mature, and then we end up with a drought cycle, which is a real beneficial aspect to the beetles. We don't have the really cold winters that kill a lot of them with 30 below temperatures. That'll really knock down a beetle population, is really, really cold temperatures in the winter for a while. So that combination of lots of food, right conditions, and those beetle populations can sometimes go, if I remember right, 4 or 5 generations a summer. And so you're exponentially growing bugs to the tune of 2 pair to about, I want to say 10, 20,000 in a matter of 1 season. And they're all looking for stuff to eat. So,
And we're finding it.
yeah. So now what's going to happen?
1910 all over again?
I don't know.
They were talking on the news tonight about 60-mile-an-hour gusts.
Yeah. Right now you couldn't get anything to burn if you wanted to.
It's wet.
Too wet. Fuel moistures are too high, especially in the 10 and 100-hour fuels. You can get some fire to go, but you can't get it to carry. And there's some articles about whether or not the bugs and then the needles drop, and whether or not that's less fire prone or more fire prone. So how many think that once the forest is dead, it's more vulnerable or less vulnerable to fire? How many more vulnerable? Dead forest.
I think there's too much.
Anyway, it's a lot more vulnerable.
Yeah.
The needles haven't gone away.
They're just dry.
They're down on the floor.
Their fuel.
They're fuel on the floor. And to me, that's what sustains most large fires, is your ground fuels. It only gets up in crowns when you've got winds and too close canopies. But if it's sustained by a ground fire, it's going to keep going no matter what.
So how resistant are ponderosa pines?
They're pretty resistant to fire if they're big.
But if they're medium,
They're still pretty resistant. As long as there's not too much heavy fuel around them cooking them.
But they don't lose their foliage, and they
Yeah.
don't.
Ponderosa pine and larch are your 2 most fire-adapted species around here. Well, lodgepole is, but it gets killed and then it regenerates. But larch can withstand an awful lot of fire, so can ponderosa pine, because the bark thickness is huge in big trees. The fire scars that you see on the larch, to me it's been interesting. In one tree north of Big Fork, there's at least 13 different fire event indicators suggesting light ground fire that went through north of Big Fork prior to fire suppression, where we haven't had anything in the last 50 to 100 years.
Well,
So,
thank you, Rick. We really
Yeah.
appreciate you coming out tonight.
okay.